The MAT Unpacked, the podcast where we open up what good really looks like in a multi-academy trust. In each episode, Chris Whiting from Academy Advisory will be joined by trust leaders and specialists to share real stories, practical lessons, and usable advice to help you run stronger trusts and improve outcomes for learners. Welcome to the MAT Unpacked. Another episode. We are back in London. Chris Whiting from Academy Advisory is here as always. How are we doing, Chris?
Very well, thank you, Ed.
And we're joined again, as we were on episode 1, by our 2 guests. Perhaps you could do the honours and introduce them.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got Hugh, Greenway and Simon Pink from the Elliot Foundation. Today we're talking about risk and making it live rather than a dusty document that is looked at once a year.
Okay, so live, and we're bringing it to life. Is that the plan today, gents?
That is the challenge you've set us. Yes.
Okay, all right. So the title is, what does good risk management look like in a trust? So firstly, I mean, the first thing would be sort of how you identify risk, I guess. So when you say risk management in a multi-academy trust, what does that actually mean day to day? I mean, how do you paint that picture?
Well, first off, I'd say we don't say risk management.
Okay.
We just say management because it is just part of the day-to-day. You know, it's the issue with a subject like this is that it's, yes, we do risk management over here, but actually the day job is over here. But actually the two are just the same thing.
Yeah.
It is just, risk is just part of what we do on a day-to-day basis. And we don't separate it out. We don't really talk about risk. So this is going to make this interesting.
Well, for the one listener who's still with us, because all the others are switched off as soon as you announce the title, the problem is, and we talked about this in our previous conversation, that public sector organisations, and indeed all organisations, grow bureaucracy like fungus. And once bureaucracy starts to take hold of management, they're seen as chores. They're just really tedious things that you have to keep doing that you don't think about in enough detail because it's just something, a box to be ticked. And the problem with risk...
That's pushed by auditors.
Yeah, well, exactly. But what the auditor would really want to know is, does the organisation reflect often and from multiple perspectives on its context and its challenges? Or is it just blindly following its strategic plan or the whims of its senior management? The difficulty, because risk is such a dull topic, I mean, I may be having an aneurysm as we speak. It is that you've got to make it relevant and digestible, because all too often in organisations it ends up being someone's job, and that someone who owns risk spends their entire time chasing managers to try and get them to answer really, really simple questions. Yeah. But those questions can seem really annoying and irrelevant when you've got something on fire, when you've got a live safeguarding issue, when you've got and it's finding a way to break that down into pieces and make sure that it's not through one lens.
It's also key to say that life safeguarding issue is risk management, because there is a risk there, an impending risk to a particular family or a child, and that's having to be dealt with. Which is why I say it is general management. It's not a separate thing to do. I suppose, I mean, the reason that we are here and discussing this is because Chris, as our internal auditor, likes the documentation that we have around our risks, and therefore wanted us to talk about that. So, you know, we have all the conversations in the audit and risk committee, and we look at the risk register, and I think we've got a reasonable example of that, or at least our internal auditor tells us that we do. And yeah, we weave it into a lot of different conversations, and it's spread out so that everyone gets involved in it. But yeah, it's difficult to say that this is something that we do separately to everything else, because, you know, risk is part of every conversation, isn't it, ultimately?
And I think that's what it's almost when you say risk, people switch off because they know something. I'm going to be involved in some mind-numbing discussion about what I'm marking my risk or issue out of. Am I going to mark it out of 5 or am I going to mark it out of 10? Who cares? It's kind of
And do I need 2 scores because I've got my naked risk and then I've got my mitigations, and do I need a revised risk factor after that? A different score.
And so the nature of doing risk for the auditors rather than for the organisation means that it can become performative. And if the managers think it's performative, that's when they disengage with it because this is just a fucking waste of time. And I've got more important things to be doing. So the issue, and it might be worth actually just looking through how it's evolved for us, because when we started, we probably patronised head teachers. We probably felt that they weren't ready to be able to think about risk in the way that we wanted to. So we kind of pulled risk management into the centre. Because they had enough to worry, don't worry your pretty little heads about this. And that was wrong because you need all eyes on it, but the eyes not to be swivelling back into their heads because they're being forced to do something that they can't stand. But where we started, we had the idea that we would try and capture it from as many perspectives as we could in the centre. But we then came up with an idea which I think has worked quite well, is that every year we'd start again from scratch. Because as soon as the reporting of risk becomes a habit, you start to use language and you become like an AI bot, just generating plausible word salad. And the problem with an auditor is if they don't know the organisation, all they can read is the words that you've written. Does it sound plausible? Do you see what I mean? It's like finding evidence of a risk is hard. You can find evidence of an issue. So what we started deciding that we would iterate. Every year we'd redesign the risk register kind of from scratch. And we went through a sheepdog phase where Andy was kind of given the responsibility to chase the other directors and have monthly conversations with them about risk.
Andy being our programme director.
Yes. Exactly. And he hated that. And the other directors hated it. and all it meant was slightly more plausible word salad. But we've now evolved to and then I came up with a cunning idea of I put a little macro into the spreadsheet which looks at every row in the risk register and inserts a date for the last time someone has altered that row.
Yes.
And if you average all of those dates, you get how up to date is this sheet. So if each director owns a sheet and one of them, their average last review date is February 2023, you've got a reasonable sign that they're not thinking about risk very often. That was brilliant for a year until my directors realised that all you had to do was go into one cell and type comma. Right. And so when a board meeting came up, suddenly everyone's latest review date went from 7 months ago to yesterday.
Yeah, which was effective risk management on the part of the operations team, because we saw the risk of being criticised for not accessing it, and so we found a system to access it and mitigate that risk very well.
But the effectiveness, where previously it had kind of forced people to update it, they realised, and you'll always evolve shortcuts because thinking about risk is hard. It's like, well, which direction am I going to look in first, and what's your prompt, and it's
the reason that we asked you to talk about this, and yes, we do like the risk register, but actually, it's because there's a few points I want to make. Actually, firstly, Hugh, you're the only CEO that I've met where we've been going around the offices and seeing the risk register actually open on the laptop with the CEO looking at it in an actual day, to be able to look at.
And that was the day that the internal auditor was
Yeah,
in there,
yeah.
so that could be entirely
Maybe.
coincidental.
That's just a human example of my little macro in the spreadsheet. But do carry on.
Excellent. Well, I've had the wool well and truly pulled over my eyes there, but you do look at risk in a way that's concise. That's not. It's not like a big, huge list of everything that could possibly go wrong, which is what you normally see. Because when risk management's done well, it's exactly like you said. It's management. Schools have been brilliant at risk managing everything for years, because there's kids that want to maybe escape and go through the door and or through a fence and hit another teacher or hit a pupil or whatever, and they're managing all of those risks every day, and it's part of formalising it. Now, yes, you have to have a risk register. It's in the regulations that you have to have one, and it is normally used as just that. Okay, we have to have one, so there it is. There's our risks. Review it every year. And it sits in complete isolation to what actually happens, the real management. And therefore it's not a useful thing. But actually, if it's done properly, what it can help, especially with trustees, to an extent executives as well, is actually signpost to where there are issues and you might need to put some thought, or particularly with trustees, they get a diet of information as part of governance through from executives. And actually, a good risk register, as yours does, it lists out the things that you do to control that, which gives them the ability to say, can I have a look at that data that is beneath that? And I know that listening to Simon and Hugh in the last audit and risk committee, or one from last year, the idea is to bring through some actual data on performance from your systems. So it almost gives that net risk factor, not by somebody going, oh, we've got really good controls here. So that thing that's flashing red is now green because we're really good at controlling budgets. You've actually got data behind it.
If your dashboard is an illustration that's not actually connected to anything, and all the dials are in the green and all the language looks nice, was clearly made up and divorced from reality. I mean, a genuine risk register, if it's used, is going to have things. There's going to be. I mean, I have so many. I have so many things that annoy me, don't I? But you know, people using silly fonts. So because you've deliberately given them a very small space to write something, with the idea that they should be concise, and rather than be concise, they just make the font size 2, which no one can read.
No. Right. So silly font size. I thought you meant Comic Sans.
Well, I have a personal hatred of Comic Sans, which I think should actually be a gross misconduct, but that's another story. A real risk register is going to shouldn't look authored. It should be a little bit messy, a little bit live. It should have some duplication, because if it's only one person's point of view, that doesn't help the trustees. So that's how we evolved, because it's in a Google sheet. We came up with the notion that each of our directors, so finance director, HR director, our education directors as a group, our SEN director, our program director, and I, on behalf of kind of the organisation, have a sheet where we categorise the risks as we see them. And we all score out of 5 times 5, so the maximum score is 25. But if you look at the front page, which pulls through the top 3 risks per directorate, there's a difference in scores. So Simon's scores tend to be a little bit higher than mine, because bit of a Cassandra.
Because I deal with government funding. That's always going to be the highest risk there is for any organisation.
And our education colleagues, for example, went through a period of they would rate really significant risks, but in one school. So one school being at risk of special measures. Yeah, okay, that is of concern, but it's not an existential risk for the trust. It's not a trust. What do you see what I mean? So, so if you get too tied up in having a common scale, what you're preventing is input, Whereas if you can live with the fact that, for the sake of argument, you've got risks that are delivered in slightly different dialects, then you can bring your judgment to bear and go, okay, so those risks aren't necessarily higher just because they've got a higher score, and you get into what you were talking about, Simon, which is that ultimately all it is a series of threads on which trustees can pull.
Yeah.
And go, well, what are you doing about? You say you're mitigating it by doing this. Is it working? Or, in fact, are you even doing what you say you're doing to mitigate? Have you started that process?
Yeah.
And we did evolve how we were thinking about it, didn't we? Because it used to just be there and we would deal with it.
Yeah.
It didn't necessarily come to trustees as regularly as it should do, but we rebranded the audit committee as the Audit and Risk Committee. And now it goes to every one of the meetings. So it does give trustees, or at least the representatives of the trustees on that subcommittee, an opportunity to come back and challenge around it, which they do.
And I think as we've evolved, and in the same way that you need a variety of lenses or perspectives, because that's I've used the analogy. In fact, go back to the idea of a picture. If you look at a picture, if you think of a picture of a mountain, you draw a mountain in 2 dimensions from where you're standing. That's not the mountain. That's just one perspective of it.
Yeah.
If you walk round the mountain, or indeed you even go up it and down it, or you have other people at different points drawing the mountain, then you can start to create an image of that mountain in 2 dimensions. You start moving through, 3 dimensions, maybe even 4. If you spend too much time choosing lots of different perspectives, you're never going to do anything with it. So your tension is, have I got enough perspectives for this heuristic of the organisation to be plausible? Can people ask, do they have the interest and authority to ask difficult questions? Are those questions being asked? Then you're probably doing okay.
It's a bit like the perfect is the enemy of good, isn't it, really?
Well, I think the second you think you're perfect in risk, you're done.
Yeah, absolutely.
But because you think you start, it's drinking your own Kool-Aid.
We've seen so many things on one of the reasons I think is this topic. Hopefully, if anyone listens to this topic, it'd be great.
They've gone now.
Yeah,
They're definitely asleep.
But especially for trustees, it is actually an opportunity to have something that really demystifies certain areas. So if you're talking average risk committee, if you're looking at something that's finance, there's one accountant. All the other people are looking at the accountant and going, is he nodding?
Yeah.
And if he's nodding, then it's probably okay because we don't really do finance. And the same, so it limits the trustee's ability to be able to add challenge. So what you're really getting is challenge popping up like whack-a-mole, really, at different parts of a meeting. I think a good risk register, when people understand it and they're involved in it, it almost becomes part of the agenda where you can have a fluid conversation and go, I'm not really a HR person, but I want to have a look at that absence data in a bit more detail. Can we bring that to the meeting next time, or can we see it offline and just understand what's going on there?
Or can you just explain in a little more detail why or how this is happening? Because if you haven't got contradictions or slightly varying versions of the same risk in your risk register, you probably haven't got enough perspectives, because it's just, if it's all in the same tone of voice and all very polished, it's probably that 2-dimensional picture. It's painted by one person, and it's not that was, sorry, I absolutely mangled that analogy, I think, but that was where I was trying to
get you. The problem is it's too often it's written by the FD and that's it. So the FD writes everything, especially this is true in a lot of small trusts that pretty much write everything, and then you've then got the educationalists that will do theirs, and quite often you click on the tabs if it's done on an Excel spreadsheet, and the format changes for all the education stuff because I don't like that. I'm going to do it my way. So the whole thing just doesn't quite work, and they're wasting time going through on a committee meeting. You don't have much time with these volunteers, and you want to make sure that challenge is useful to you, because it's better they challenge you than the DFE do. I think you'd agree with that. That's probably...
I don't know, I'm thinking about that.
I mean, it's fair to say, this is the third trust that I've worked in. It's the first one where the CEO takes as much of an interest in risk and the risk register as I've seen elsewhere, where it has been written by the FD, which was. So the fact that the CEO does push this forward as an agenda item does help in terms of it being taken up. But it has been very useful that we have devised individual pages for each of the individual directorates to work on, so that it is, it's across the organisation, that lots of different people are looking at it from different perspectives. We are pushing it in front of trustees, and we're getting their perspectives as well, because we have recently diversified our board as well, and we've got a range of individuals very senior in their organisations from lots of different backgrounds that will have their own input to that as well. We also meet with the schools on a regular basis, so we've got the governance review system whereby we meet with all of the schools remotely at least once a term, and within the various dashboards that we have, there is a section there for what do you consider to be your top 3 risks. So we're getting these data points coming through from all different angles. We pick things up from the surveys that we do of staff, pupils, of parents and carers. So we're getting data points from all different places, which should hopefully then feed into the overall risk assessment and the risk register that we've got at the heart of that.
Yeah.
So it's important to get diffuse views.
But you then really get into how much of, because ideally what we're trying to do is to make the consideration and mitigation of risk a habit rather than a chore. And you've probably got to do that in baby steps, almost. And if you can create the environment in which people think about risk without necessarily realizing they're thinking about risk, you can get them into the swimming pool, a lot more easily than the throwing them in, just going, right, here's your monthly meeting to consider your risk. And I think realizing that risk identification and mitigation come in lots of different forms. So as Simon said, we survey all of our staff every term. And at the end, we're asking, so there's a tedious kind of corporate thing behind it that we ask them the question, would you recommend the Elliot Foundation as an employer? So that we've got a net recommender score and we can show over the years, and that's lovely. And we do the same thing with parents. Would you recommend your child's school to a friend or family? We ask principals whether they think the Elliot Foundation helps them run their schools, because those voices aggregated back to trustees protect the schools against Simon and I going insane or getting carried up in our own idea of what might work and ignoring the voices of the stakeholders. But that's risk management. It doesn't look like it's not necessarily directly on the risk register, but it's really important, because if we started doing things that, if we dealt with, if we pushed too hard on our staff dealing with the significant rise in children with additional needs that aren't funded and just go, suck it up, you would immediately see a spike or a decline, rather, a slump in the staff feedback score. Likewise, if we started ignoring parents' wishes in certain areas, you'd see a decline there. So triangulation there makes risk a habit rather than a line on the register.
Yeah. And I mentioned something else that was a reason we wanted to speak to you about this, and it's not just because the risk register is not just a thing in isolation. The other things that it should link through to strategic objectives, and what we often see with a strategy document, it's a 3-year thing or timeline, and that's what we're going to do, and they might revisit it a few times. What I don't see at many other places that you have here is where you have the I forget the terminology, but you have the KPIs that link back to those strategic objectives over time. And you don't get hung up about a small dip because, of course, that happens. It's the overall trend over time. But what you've got there is a link to, are we achieving our strategic objectives? And also, are the strategic objectives the right ones? Because if you went down a rabbit hole somewhere and it was upsetting your stakeholders, you'd see it on a spike to be able to then have changed.
Well, you might expect we might stumble on something interesting here because there's a difference between me and Simon here, which might be fun.
Oh dear.
In that we might not have. You're alluding to a document which I've had for years, which is a very ugly document, which has gone through lots of iterations, called triangulation, which shows over time the feedback scores from our principals, from our parents, from our staff, from our children. We ask the children at the end of year 6, same question. But it also looks at how much money have we got left in the bank? What's our overall key stage 2 outcomes? What are our percentage of Ofsted good or better? Mm-hmm. And so what you're looking for is over time, as the organisation grows, are your percentage of schools that are rated to be good or better, or new framework, we'll change the language, are your outcomes for children growing, increasing over time? And if you're doing that, are you achieving it without spending money you haven't got or pissing off large sections of your stakeholder environment? So upsetting your staff or your pupils or your parents. And if essentially the qualitative and quantitative measures of good education are going up slowly over time and you haven't crashed the other feedback scores, you're probably doing the right kind of thing. The thing that's interesting is I'm less of a fan of big strategic documents. See, I told you it was interesting. I'm more interested in there's the broad direction of travel.
Yeah.
Now let's work towards that, rather than and Simon and I go through a loop of trying to make sure that we have sufficient planning to support that and review of the strategic objectives.
Yeah, I'd like to write it down occasionally. Rather than just being in your head, it is useful for the wider organisation that we do actually write down what our objectives is and have a plan to actually achieve them, rather than going, yeah, we're going to do that. It's like, well, how?
I have an annoying habit of liking grey areas, because grey areas allow you room to manoeuvre when things happen that you hadn't foreseen. So but that's a good tension, and again, and that's also a risk management factor, because it's.
But when we come back to, so what is it that we do, and how do we do it, and do we do it well?
Yeah.
It would be nice to have that written down, especially when we go out and we say to new schools, would you like to come and join us? And they go, yeah, what do you do? It's like, well, we can give you a broad outline and I'll let you talk at you for half an hour. It's like, here's a document about how we work. This is our school improvement plan. This is how we work with schools. I think that's a useful thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't just get through on vibes, optimism, and yeah. No, the law of 7 Ps does apply, but it's back to that point about how long do you spend anticipating challenge and accountability and regulation and audit, and how long do you spend actually doing the do? And you've got to have a piece in there for the planning. Now, I think there's it's not up to Simon's standards, clearly, but the degree to which we describe how we do what we do is improving, I think.
It is, kicking and screaming, yes. I think we probably need to part that one, because we're not going to sort that one out right now. I think it's worth saying, going back to the original risk register, where we started from, one thing that we have not done is gone back to every individual school and says you need to have your own risk register, which a lot of trusts do. And then that becomes very much an exercise for schools to do that wastes time. What we do, as we've said before, is have it and do a risk return
every term,
which is basically what are your top 3 risks. So what is it that is causing you sleepless nights? We want to know the key stuff. Now, yes, you can write down 101 different ways that your budget's not going to cover everything that you want to do. We know that, and it's not going to be particularly different from school A to school B to school C. But what is it in your context that makes you have those sleepless nights? And then we can have a conversation around those, so that it's a supportive conversation about how can we as executive help you as an individual school and a head teacher achieve what you want to achieve and have some degree of work-life balance and sleep at night.
And that connects back to the plan, and when we do our governance reviews of schools, the tying off of the knot is we always look at the academy improvement plan and its top 3 priorities. So you're looking for, is there any connection or frustration between the top 3 risks and the top 3 priorities? Mm-hmm. Or actually, is there something, does something not feel right? Is it you're looking for, I'm being told a story here.
Yeah, these things don't match.
Yeah. Or there isn't sufficient trust for you to feel that you can be as open with me about the things that you're not comfortable with at the moment. Because that's the problem with accountability, is if I'm providing you any data point that I provide you, first goes through the filter, what the hell are you going to do with this number when I give it to you?
Indeed. So risk management for schools, risk one is the CEO going to sack me?
Yeah, exactly.
So, everything is then devised around that to minimise that particular risk.
What level, what mask of credibility do I need to put on? Yeah. But in actual fact, if you were going to risk manage, you've got to somehow get them to take the mask off and go, I'm a bit worried about this. And that's where risk management comes from. If you're on that journey from turning it into something you do into a habit, it can only come as you grow the trust and the openness, because otherwise it's always going to snap back to being.
And does it have a tangible benefit? Because one of the problems that we have, it's really hard being a head teacher. It's like being a football manager in some ways. If you don't get results now, then you're toast. And
you do know there was a marvellous study done at the University of Reading of who the 3rd most successful manager in the history of the Premiership is. You know? No manager at all.
No manager at all.
Is the 3rd most successful manager in the history of the Premiership, because they're not meddling and the players are trying to do their best to impress the new manager so that they there is a metaphor. No, that's unfair. But actually, at a school, for us as leaders, we really can get lost in our own narrative. Any school, and indeed any trust, can exceed the quality of its senior leadership. It can't exceed the quality of its teaching.
Yeah, it's true. But do you think you can get it helps with that conversation where people can be open about the support that they need? Because quite often, it's that when you're leading an organisation, you can't do it all by yourself. You can be the best head teacher in the world. You can't do it all yourself. It's a team. There will be areas where, one of the things I find it's a really positive thing when I speak to a new CEO. We've had a couple in our client base recently, and the first conversation is, I don't really know what I'm doing. I've got some, and that is, they're probably on the track to be really well-performing CEOs, because the ones that come and think they know how to do the job are the ones where the risk is. The ones that are open to listen go, I've got a weak spot here. And they come even to us and say, I don't understand this. Can you talk me through it? Can you talk me through risk management and how it works? They're going to the people that their partners and openly going, I don't know this. I need some help. I need some support. That's where we even put them in touch sometimes with other trusts and people that have gone through the similar journey. Sort of where the podcast idea came from, really sharing best practice. But do you think that, in a way, in this sort of dull, boring risk register conversation we don't want to have, actually, because you've got the bottom-up way of looking at risk as well from schools and getting to do the returns, can help with that piece of getting them to remove the mask, more openness?
You'd hope so.
Yeah.
But it once again depends on the personality of the head teacher involved.
Yeah.
I mean, there are lots of, even within our trust, so there are some principles that are not there yet in terms of understanding us and trusting us and opening up because of their experience with previous MATs or local authorities,
and that's not,
or just their personality.
And that's not a bad thing at all.
No.
That's not, God, Simon's heard me say this many times. We see the world through the scars of our own experience. It's really hard to convince me that what I'm seeing is not what I'm seeing, because it rhymes. So I can feel the prickles. I can feel the thing in my stomach. Everything's suggesting to me that if I do this, the following things will happen afterwards. So to unlearn things which you've got to do to be, to head to your the openness and transparency and honesty in organisations, particularly hierarchical organisations, is a lovely idea, but it's a bit like nuclear disarmament. You go first. You need the people at the top to show vulnerability and to show that they can be wrong. Because otherwise, why would you ever do that? Because you're just, painting a target on yourself. And again, that comes back to risk. It's like, risk isn't, I'm a bit crap at my job. But that's what it can feel like to an awful lot of people. Because if you've got a dysfunctional relationship with your trust board and they go, show me your top 3 risks, fix them before the next meeting.
Yeah.
If one of the risks is the collapse of Western civilization and its impact on education.
I've seen some risk registers where, and it probably comes down to that insecurity thing, where if you had the fall of Western civilization there impacting on education, they would say they've got a control in place and it's now green. I have actually seen risk
you
of funding.
You and I had a conversation years ago, I think, because on one of our business continuity points, you were asking me about the mitigation of what happens if Google collapses, because we've got a lot of Google systems. And my mitigation is actually it's a risk we have to accept, because if Google collapses, we've got bigger problems.
Yeah. But it's honestly though, it's not a problem. If you've got a risk register and the good thing that where you're going with this is data driven, effectively net risk comes from indicators, is as I understand is the where you're hoping to move towards.
I think, I don't know, I because I've rebuilt it every year, I don't know what I'm going to do differently this year. Because last year I made sure that we added in addition to each individual director and the academic board's consideration of education risk as a whole, and the school's termly returns, fed that through to the committee as a whole, so that they could compare it. I think I'm not sure what the destiny. I think, as I was saying earlier on, I think it's about a heuristic. It's about having enough data that an image emerges that might be credible, but if you get attached to a perfect few, I don't know, it's
not data in isolation, is it? Because
No.
what we're talking about is building personal relationships with our head teachers. So it's about those conversations as much as it's any data point. Now, we have evolved our data systems over the years, and we continue to do so. Recently changed MIS, looking at the reporting out of that, seeing how we can pull it in from other systems as well, use of AI and things to try and pull everything into one place. So we are trying to do that to get all those data points. But at the same time, that's interesting, but it shouldn't be at the expense of the human connection. I'm saying that as the FD.
I love that.
I don't believe in the human connection. But on behalf of the trust,
is done.
on behalf of the trust, I should say that is something that we are trying to do. Because, those conversations with a head teacher are just as important as any dashboard.
Yes. And in fact, maybe to go all the way back to the beginning, why do you do risk management? Because you need to be satisfied that the people running the organisation actually know the bloody organisation.
Yeah.
Because if all you're doing is reading self-improvement textbooks and some vision of your own personal journey as a leader and writing things which often happens, you could be driving at speed towards a brick wall. I mean, one of my first bosses said to me, two things. One which is quite fun. He said, the only thing you need to succeed in business is honesty and integrity. If you can fake them, you've got it made. But he would then go on to say, he said, the only thing you need to run an organisation are 3 questions. Where did we say we'd be? Where are we now? And why and what are we going to do as a result is the kind of final question. And risk management is tied up in all of that. Because if you don't know where you are, don't make any decisions. It's Alice in Wonderland. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there.
I think it's important to say as well that probably the first line on most of the job descriptions for the executive team here is know your schools.
Yeah.
So it is important that we do not sit in isolation, and so we've got the structure with the regional directors working with the individual principals, and they're out and about all the time. And the rest of us get out to schools, not quite as regularly, but we still get out there and we build those personal relationships. And one of the advantages that we have here is that we do have a reasonably small executive team, but we've been in place for quite a long period of time now. I mean, I've been here 7.5 years and I still consider myself one of the new boys because there hasn't been that turnover. So that means that we've had these conversations year on year on year about the same schools, and we do know and understand where they're coming from, which means that when we can sit down and have conversations with the principals, we do that with a degree of credibility because we do know where they're coming from. We know the history of the school probably from before they started as being the head teacher. And we can have those open and honest conversations and be there and be supportive, because it's also a very interesting sector in that you can get towards the top of your chosen profession without experience in a number of the things that you then suddenly inherit when you become a head teacher. So in most organisations, if you're working your way up the food chain, you get experience of HR and finance and other aspects, IT. In education, you can just have classroom experience and managing classroom experience until you become head teacher, and then suddenly you're running a medium-sized enterprise with all that HR responsibility, all that finance responsibility, all these weird governance rules they didn't know anything about, and suddenly it's like, well, there's your job, mate. It's a bit of a shock for quite a few of them, isn't it?
Yeah,
so
it is.
That's when we build those relationships, because they then come to kind of trust the support that we give them if we do it right. It builds those relationships and it helps us have those conversations and understand the risks.
We transfer. I hadn't thought of it that way. Actually, that's really interesting. I think we promote on the basis of expertise in one domain and assume expertise in a completely separate domain once you've been given. And I mean, I've talked for years about the difference between primary headship and secondary headship, or certainly small primaries, as being, the situational and distributed leadership, because primary schools are by their nature smaller, good primary head teachers are like spiders at the centre of a web. They can sense. They have multiple sources of information for when something is going wrong in the school, and generally they go and fix it themselves. That can be responding to a child or a parent or a noise or a smell or it's just they. There's
always a smell.
There's always a smell. There's quite often a disturbing noise coming from the playground. But it is very much that situational leadership. You respond and you correct and you model. When you take those people and make them leaders of very big schools with more than one site, or put them in charge of a MAT, they have to stop relying on the evidence of their own senses. And they have to start managing through other people. And the skill in one domain does not indicate the skill in the second domain.
Completely different.
And absolutely. Yeah.
Indeed, that's part of the internal challenge we've got at the moment, isn't it? Because obviously we've grown quite a lot. I mean, didn't do the introduction at the start. We should probably point out that we are a primary-only MAT of 36 schools across 3 regions. So we are slightly different to many of the MATs out there. Where was I going with that?
I don't know.
No, I don't know either. Right, it's fine.
We'll hope the host rescues us and points us in the right direction.
Not a problem. I mean, we talked a lot about understanding risk, identifying risk, and perhaps those barriers to kind of getting a true picture as well. And a lot of that seems to be based on confidence and making sure that you have that trust in terms of relationships. But what about how you control or improve those areas once you've identified those risks? How do you go about that?
I think it's iterative, and it's back to something we were saying earlier. The job is just to make it better, not best. You can only do what you can do any given day with the resources available to you on that day. And all too often, when documents or regulatory systems or whatever, the damage of bloody Jim Collins good to great. I mean, if I hear another person talk about who we're going to get on the bus, I'll drive the bloody thing over them. It is so irrelevant to school leadership, but still used by so many people as an indicator of what good should look like. But that phrase, what good should look like, is pernicious because that's not necessarily what we should be doing. It's let's make things better iteratively, because you might not know what good looks like for your particular context. And yet we get absolutely attached to, in education, giving people labels. So this is an outstanding or I can't have forgotten category one in the new, that's embarrassing, the new Ofsted framework, strong standard and meet standard, strong standard. I can't remember what the top one is, what the new outstanding, exceptional. Well, there you go. Yeah. That was worth the millions that were spent on it. We give schools a label and we say, you're exceptional or you're outstanding. Tell us what we're doing wrong. Well, more often than not, in schools, as in organisations, as in life, many of the people who are doing well are just there because they've been lucky, or may not know why they're doing well because the organisation is succeeding despite them. And so asking them to go to somewhere else, which is may have a massively different context, and you know, you cannot stretch expertise from one domain to another and be assured that it will work. And yet we always do that. We get upset. That language of best practice. Most of education is at best a complex system, and in complexity theory, within complex systems, best practice doesn't exist. Best practice only exists in simple systems where the same inputs give you the same outputs every time. That doesn't apply to a lot of education. You have better practice, which is why, and that actually might feed back to, the amount of time spent writing about how you're going to get to where you're going to get to, and that might be something I need to reflect upon.
That's a balance. I mean, in terms of controls and things, we've got 3-day strategy session.
I know,
which will be written up and turned into a strategic plan. But going back to the original point about controls, clearly from my side on the finances, controls are an important part of everything. And we are encouraged to do that through the Academy's Trust Handbook these days, accounts directions, and the input from our beloved auditors, of course.
Thank you.
I think that the key thing is that they shouldn't just be taken that this is what we do. We've been around long enough now that we know we are going to get certain audit points from internal and external audit that are going to push back on certain aspects because they're not necessarily best practice. But the key question we always ask is, what impact does that have on the day-to-day experience? What impact does it have on the bottom line? So some of the best practice items that we get through every year that, we should record all our restricted and unrestricted funds during the year and what allocation comes from which. And it's like, well, doesn't matter from my perspective. Sorry.
It's a year-end reporting issue. It doesn't affect what happens in the classroom, does it, for a second?
The majority of our funding is the GAG funding that is classified as restricted. But I'm not going to allocate every item of spend against that, or whether it's come from the unrestricted. The key things around restricted funds.
He likes grey areas as well.
I think we all do.
No, I just like my view. It's important that you push back on that. You don't just take all those audit recommendations as read, and everything needs to be implemented. Now, that is the system that the DFE would like us to do, because we have to report on things every year to say we've had these recommendations. How many of these are still outstanding? Now, there could be ones that are repeated every year that are never going to come off that list because we don't agree with them.
Or you
and
can
actually,
just never
you've got to
get
accept
them
that
to
that's
zero.
fine.
You can never get them to zero. You can purchase requisitions or ordering. You get in dates. You will have somebody that picks up the phone. I need this thing. Should have got an order. Didn't. Sorry. It will always happen a few times. So to say it's got to come off at some point. But the one thing I did want to just mention was where our sort of thoughts, I think, changed a little bit with risk management was when COVID happened, and suddenly you think it made me reflect on what a risk register is really. You think, suddenly I've got this document that the boards are looking at in the meeting, and it actually has got a clear link from what they're talking about in the
To someone dying.
to somebody, and also to a cleaner with a bottle of detergent. Actually, what they do to prevent it directly. And I thought, haven't seen anything with such a direct link. It's like this wonderful ivory tower document that doesn't really match what actually happens, and there really isn't any care or thought to how that risk is actually managed on the ground, which is where it's important. And I think what you've done to bridge that is obviously it's a bit more difficult when you're talking about a larger strategic risk, but for the fact that you've captured it from a school level up as well, and also you do from the descriptions that you have, it does link better. But your perspective of that and how you can get that golden thread, if you like, from so it's not just this thing that lives just in the trust.
It is interesting you bring up COVID because I perversely, I kind of enjoyed COVID. I know.
Not getting it, I hope.
No. Well, I got it. It was horrible. No, I got it. My wife's a nurse, and she was actually quite scared. Nearly rang 999 a couple of times.
Horrible.
But fine. Because we came into our own as an organisation, we were able to do so. I mean, from our head teacher's point of view, I suspect there were a number of our head teachers who went, "Bloody hell! I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could turn that around." And bear in mind, we were in a situation where our government was utterly chaotic. I mean, shambolic and making it up as it went along. The DFE wasn't much better at the beginning. It was dithering. It was the guidance it was issuing was terrifying.
Local authorities were struggling.
And not necessarily through their own fault, because they'd been bled to death for a very long time and didn't have the capacity left, but they were absolutely stuck. And we had the advantage that we were able to think quite quickly and quite clearly about risk. We even took a document to trustees in which we categorised our hierarchy of decision making, which we'd never done before, to make it quite clear that what government was telling us to do was not the first and most important thing. That actually the articles and objects of the organisation and the law of the land and our moral purpose come before what government thinks we should do under our contractual instruments, because it's a bit there's a comparison now with politics in America where people are encouraging generals to disobey illegal orders. Just because a government's told you to do something doesn't mean it's right. And because things were moving so, and I'm not pointing the finger at people, because everyone was trying their absolute hardest in an incredibly fast-moving situation. But it was fun to be able to help people feel safer quickly and give them security.
You weren't expecting us to be talking about how fun COVID was.
Not at all.
No, but I genuinely think, and I think we functioned incredibly well as a team.
We talked before about the kind of response from principals about whether they'd recommend joining. That metric that year was
went
the
to 100%.
highest.
Yeah, it went to 100%.
Because they felt that we were actually supporting them and understanding the real shit show they were facing. So that was a high point for us. I wouldn't go as far as saying it was fun, but it was a different challenge.
I enjoyed the challenge. I felt there was a real sense of fulfilling a purpose. And making a difference to people.
Indeed.
Yeah.
As you said, the important thing was that we wrote it down and shared it with trustees, so that everyone could have a joint understanding of where we were trying to get to and how we were doing it. So that was important.
Well, just to kind of draw things to a close, I think it's really interesting because we started off talking about data and Google Sheets, and I think we've kind of finished talking about relationships and actually how building those relationships with those people and understanding and getting that trust is actually a crucial part of it, really, isn't it? Would that be a fair sort of roundup, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, we're working in a sector where the relationships are important. They should be supported by the data, but they shouldn't be superseded by the data.
And every bit of data is important. You want to get away from just somebody's opinion that, there's a problem over here, the government might reduce the funding and actually I'm going to be able to control it and it's going to be fine. That's not true. You need data, but you need context, and you only get context from communication and from relationships. So, I think it's bringing in the human element to it, and the fact that hopefully if anyone is listening by the end of this one, that risk management can be done as part of what you do normally in your day job, and it can actually help formalise things and make things a little bit easier for trustees and executives.
Excellent. Good place to leave it. Thank you, gentlemen. There we are.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the MAT Unpacked. If you found it useful, please subscribe or follow the show and share it with a colleague in your trust. And if you want a specialist partner to strengthen your assurance, improve your risk management, and give your board real confidence, speak to the team at Academy Advisory. You'll find us on LinkedIn or visit our website, academyadvisory.com.